Since its eye-opening premiere in the summer of 2019, The Boys has continued to push the boundaries of what superhero stories can be, platforming a raw, unfiltered, introspective, and cynical outlook that contrasts the competition so well that it even now parodies them. As a result, The Boys is one of the must-watches of the past decade, even if you're not a fan of superheroes. And though Season 3 may have flaws that potentially hinder it from being the best of the series, it is undoubtedly the most important, providing extra character investment that adds to the potential longevity of the series. Some may have already noted this since it's such a pervasive idea of the entire season, but it really can't go without saying how well The Boys execute this idea of fathers passing down their hatred to their children. The two leads carry this idea very well, with Butcher repeating the same neglectful, abusive, and destructive behavior of his father. They both amplify a macho image that is toxic to those who feel smaller around them, and they both reward violent behavior. Similarly, Homelander constantly seeks the approval of others, mirroring his biological father Soulja Boy, who also wanted to impress his own dad, but was torn down because he took a shortcut. Again, parallel to this, Homelander is torn down by his father when he throws his insecurities in his face. We are constantly seeing this idea, this hatred being passed down from generation to generation until Butcher eventually breaks that cycle. This happens when he decides to stop Huey from dropping any further to his level, and when he also chooses to no longer support someone who reminds him of his own abusive father. This is a well-tight theme that runs through the season, and though I feel Butcher's eventual turn to the light was a tad bit rushed, it's still a very well-executed idea. The brilliance of themes such as this is the further greater meaning they provide to previous seasons and encounters. When Butcher met his father, we initially shrugged him off as a miserable, abusive man that projected his own image onto his children. But the visualization of the past shows for all his despicable faults, he wasn't necessarily wrong. This is the strong suit of The Boys, its character writing. It's never been the most complex plot with nuanced themes, but it's always been able to create believable characters, who even if they're terrible, have some sort of logic to their being. Since that is the case, I will continue to review this season by looking how it handles its characters, as it is a character-driven narrative. Now remember I just said that The Boys does a good job of adding logic to even the most unlikable of characters. Well, take this guy for example, Monique's husband. I'm sure you like me hated this guy possibly more than anyone on the show. However, by looking at the introduction of another, we can start to understand why he and many others follow Homelander and brush off the side that we've always seen. That person is Soulja Boy. He connects everything and ties up loose ends. Our views of him almost encapsulate the world's views of Homelander. I don't know if the writers meant this intentionally, and either way, it doesn't really matter since it's reinforced becoming a message on its own regardless. Nevertheless, we've seen the horrors of Homelander, right? But the public has only ever really heard about them, and they usually lack the context we have seen because we're literally seeing him behind the curtains. And so the public in the world is always told how bad Homelander is by people like Starlight and others, which is presented in that world to fall on deaf ears, or at least some. However, this may seem unfeasible for the viewer, and so Soulja Boy channels this message. Just like the public, when we see Soulja Boy, we kind of like him, but then we hear the terrible things he has done, stuff that even parallel Homelander. Yet, we never ever view him in the same way as we view Homelander, purely because we haven't had the context of previous seasons being able to look at how he behaves. It's the power of showing, not telling. Actions speak louder than words, and seeing the evil acts of Homelander in contrast to hearing them when it's about Soulja Boy are two entirely different things. More importantly, with how this applies to Monique's husband's infuriating logic, you gain a greater understanding as to why Homelander still has such a strong following, as they've never really seen what we've seen. And when they have, it usually lacks the context, or in some cases, it just seems like he's defending himself. And without delaying the inevitable any longer than it needs to be already, this man, Anthony Starr, deserves an award for his performance as Homelander. A mark of a great actor is their ability to convey all kinds of emotions through every body part. And with just his face, there's so much complexity to unravel in the many close-ups of Homelander. Following the crippling blows of last season, we open to see a flawless performance of an unstable Homelander, whose bruised ego peers through these freakish glares. Taking advantage of the incredible range he brings to the character, Eric Kripke includes a Gollum-like sequence that is easily one of my favourite moments in The Boys. Interestingly, the writers also used the pain Homelander is experiencing to transform the brutal superhero into a somewhat sympathetic character. After all, he has lost everything: the love of his life, the support of his chosen family, and his biological son. To make matters worse, since birth he has only been seen as a product, which Edgar never forgets to remind him of. He is a man who seeks approval, love, and most importantly, admiration. And the lack of love pushes him to the edge, to the point this season that he's left with no choice but to vent his anger to one of his enemies. That is really great character writing, bolstered by a phenomenal actor that knows the value of each muscle in the face, and how that can tell a story on its own. Other characters such as Homelander's closest friend, Black Noir, really shine this season. Some will say they didn't want him killed off, but I'm happy they did kill him off. It helps remind us of the stakes and puts us back in a constant feeling of dread, because if he's not safe from Homelander, then it really opens your eyes to how useless everyone else is to him. Noir was his closest thing to a friend, even if it wasn't a healthy relationship, since the reason for Homelander's appreciation in the first place is due to Noir's unwavering loyalty. But that never flinching desire to placate the desires of the sociopathic Superman of this world was born of trauma. He doesn't go out of line, as the last time he attempted to do something for himself, he was terribly beaten to a pulp by a man he admired. And what a way to also tell that story. The genius of this backstory is tenfold. Black Noir was a stoic, silent assassin, robot-like in the way he had no human characterization. The showrunners add that though in the most effective way through this flashback scene. Not because of him being beaten, but of his fear and the choice to use cartoon-like characters. It shows that he has a wild creative imagination, one that you'd only assume a human being to have, not a deadly killer. With that being said, Homelander and Black Noir were always fan favourites, characters who I instantly liked from the get-go due to one's incredible complexity and the other's mystery. However, someone that I've always liked but always seems to be forgotten by the end is Mother's Milk. This season though changes that entirely. We managed to get greater reasoning for simple things such as his body language, his frequent OCD and tapping, something that was suggested to be born from his trauma and triggers whenever he is uncomfortable. And now moments like this, when his daughter can just comfort him, leave a lasting emotional impact in the series. On top of that, you have him refuse again and again to become the things that he hates. Unlike Butcher and Huey, who spiral out of control, he continues to refuse to stoop to their level. Understandably, aspects of that writing are not always clean, as sometimes it comes across ridiculous and naive at times. But enough is done to make me see the honourable direction he represents, a man that sticks by his principles, a real leader. However, not everything is exactly rosy, as the handling of Huey and Starlight was mixed for me. Their arc this season was heavily intertwined, particularly Huey, who has been exhausted with constantly losing to the shady ploys of those he tries to beat. To make matters worse, he is made to feel inferior by his lack of usefulness to those he loves, which Starlight unfortunately reminds him of. All of this is great writing that all seems natural and deserved. However, my problems center around Starlight's moral high ground that she projects onto Huey. Knowing everything that is at stake, she continues to look down on the decisions he makes, and the writers justify her through this conversation, which on the surface is gratifying, because in the traditional exploration of the superior moral code, she's right. But The Boys isn't that, or at least it hasn't been that. Quite the opposite. It's the reason for this that it felt undeserved in my opinion. Besides that, I loved everything else. The chemistry between the two actors has always been there, and the final moments where Huey, instead of succumbing to his fears, supports the people he loves, both metaphorically and literally, was really satisfying. Speaking of lovebirds though, French and Kimiko had strong development, with both of them running into their own demons. For him, he has to confront his past while she has to wrestle with her conscience. But instead of facing their problems head on, they look to run away from them, with Marseille being the supposed haven. It is only when both are given something they never originally had that we see them grow through the power of choice. Her powers were forced upon her, but later when she loses them, she decides to have them back in order to protect those she loves. For Frenchie, he now has the courage to do and say as he pleases, no longer being the straddled lapdog to either Nina or Butcher. For me, I never expected these two to be written as well as they have, but they've become one of my favourites. Speaking of which, something that may shock a lot of people is that Ashley is one of my favourite written characters of the show. She has been the foot of everyone's hill, scrabbling to do her best at her job, which others have fairly found annoying. But I also equally find it quite likeable that she works as hard as she does. This season she's had her fill and doesn't hesitate to remind characters like A-Train what a crappy person he was to people, illuminating the speedster that his newfound conscience comes from him finally experiencing the pain he has inflicted on others. Fascinatingly, this leads to him doing the most redeeming thing he has done in the series thus far, a sincere, heartfelt apology. She pushed A-Train, whether intentional or not, to his most redeemable moment. On top of that, her genuine care for Maeve was endearing. Initially, it comes across as fair for herself as to why she'd want to help the Wonder Woman of this world, but as the ending showed, she genuinely did want to help her, or at least eventually grew to. In fact, the ending they chose for Queen Maeve circles her character arc very nicely. The potential problem though is The Boys has established a tone and identity to commit to uncomfortable realities and consequences, but this falls in line with traditional storytelling, in which The Boys is anything but. For this reason, killing Maeve may have been the best choice if you wanted to remain tonally consistent. I mean, she did take a hit by Soldier Boy at point blank range, which was suggested to be able to kill Homelander. But as mentioned, it's fine for now, as the resolution was still well done, but this cannot become a pattern, which many other shows infamously fell into. Ultimately, The Boys has no problem with unveiling the grim insides of these superheroes, shedding the fact that they're nothing but false heroes, squabbling, plotting, and always vying for more whilst maintaining the facade of the traditional superhero world. And I know some say previous seasons have been better, but I heavily emphasize that despite its faults, this season delivers much needed character development that adds greater investment, which only increases the tension. When we look back, we may just say that it was here and now when The Boys grounded its feet to truly fly towards its potential to become one of the best shows amongst its peers. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.